My name's Evan. I'm 29. And last Friday my sister tried to get me expelled from a university I wasn't even enrolled in. It happened in the library, 3 floors of fluorescent quiet, and Chloe, chin lifted at the railing, said, "My brother's been cheating all semester." I saw test answers in his backpack. 200 heads turned. Phones rose. The neon final week do not disturb wristband on my arm felt like a handcuff. For as long as I remember, Chloe has been the golden child. Rooms tilt toward her. I was the early shift and the fixer. She got in on legacy and polish. I got a job at the campus bookstore and built an education from the back row of big lectures that never checked IDs. At 6:00 a.m., I'd clock in. Stock, the very books I couldn't afford. And time, my breaks to psych, 101 at 9. Organic at 11. Lit at 2. I did the readings. Joined study groups. And no one asked questions because I had the same backpack and the same midterm face. Our parents loved the idea that both their kids were in the college grind. They didn't ask for receipts. I kept mine anyway in a manila folder labeled "Someday." 2 rejection letters on top. The neglect wasn't a scene. It was a pattern. The $280 emergency for her sorority deposit. You'll make it back. Mom said, "The $1? 150 temporary textbook charges I paid down, because we can't risk Chloe's GPA. Dad said, 3 missed statistics deadlines after rush week while she told me, don't be technical. It's the same campus. Finals week, tightened like a belt. Her quizzes cratered. My study groups whispered. I spotted a blue post-it in her planner, PR, be believable underlined twice. Then came the library. My backpack sat by my shoe pencil case. Crushed banana. A stapled packet I'd printed that morning, my rejection letter. Not a key. In the dining hall that night, I asked, "Why lie?" She barely looked up. "Everyone will believe me over you. I'm student government president. Dean's list. You're the weird brother who hovers. When I fail, I'll look principled instead of unlucky." The heat lamps buzzed. Later. The voicemail arrived. Academic misconduct hearing. Friday. 8 a.m. Bring documentation. I set my folder on my chest and stared at the ceiling. I didn't need to be liked. I needed the rules to matter. The golden child had a smirk. The ghost had receipts. Our house ran on Chloe's weather. If she was sunny, the kitchen sparkled. And if she wasn't, we all carried umbrellas. Golden child was never said out loud. But you could smell it in the lemon clean pride. I learned to make myself useful in the shadows, fix the Wi-Fi. Get the car. Keep the peace. The bookstore became my foothold. Those first minutes before the lights woke felt like ownership. By 9, I became a shape among shapes in the back row. 11 was orgo with a metronome voice professor. 2 was lit where voices overlapped like rain. I memorized the campus the way enrolled students never need to, which stair squeaked. When the vending machines were refilled, which tables warmed at 3 p.m. We traded complaints like normal students. She'd grown about a TA. I'd joke about grading our parents ate it up. Sometimes the glass cracked and the machinery showed. She'd come home after a week of mixers with a smile stapled on and hands shaking under the table. The $280 emergency moved from my account before Mom finished the moral. You're responsible. She needs this. I found the glittery wristband in the trash. Rinsed it. Kept it for no good reason, other than proof that didn't come with a spreadsheet. Without trying. I learned Chloe's grammar favors that advance the story stay, the rest gets edited out. When she borrowed my notes and uploaded them to Nowhere, she said, "They're on the shared drive." Like possession could be declared retroactively. The blue post-it, PRB believable, reappeared the week before finals. She was rehearsing. My hope lived small, a professor's nod. A coworker covering my till so I could catch the last 15 minutes of a lab. A study group that didn't mind my quiet. I told myself if I kept showing up, the door would swing the day I could pay for it. I should have known rumors don't start with words. They start with room temperature. It cooled by a degree. Then 2. I kept learning anyway. Because oxygen is still oxygen, even if no one writes your name on the tank. Patterns don't announce themselves. They stack, First stack moms 1043p. M. Text. Emergency $280 or she loses her spot, and the next morning a pink wristband stamped FR1000 PM in the trash. Second stack dad's email about $1. 150 inches temporary textbook charges. Followed by Ev. You're good with hours. Handle the paydown. Not a question. That was 6 dawns. 4 double. And 3 weeks of no lunches. Third stack. 3 missed statistics deadlines during career building. A group chat gone sour. A private ping. She said you'd handle it, and my careful reply, I'm not in your class. Don't be so technical. Chloe said, in mezzanines and study rooms. Jokes sharpened. He always has the answers. Maybe he has the tests. I kept moving. Motion is a disguise. The week smelled like ozone. Monday. He seems too confident. Tuesday. You're officially in this course. Right. Wednesday, a chair scraped a fraction away when I sat. Thursday, an anonymous post. Some people act above integrity. Friday was inevitable. I started cataloging for a different kind of storm timesheets with N0559 and 0602, neat as heartbeats, bank statements that told a quiet biography, 2 rejection letters with dates that hurt and helped, a department email that said the quiet part, large lectures won't verify IDs at the door. In the mirror, I didn't look like a ghost anymore. I looked like a witness. Sound should stay small in a library. But her sentence found every corner. He's been cheating. I saw the test answers in his bag. Phones rose like periscopes. I walked to the desk and asked the librarian to open my backpack in the side room. Pencil case. Crushed banana. A stapled packet, my printed rejection letter. No test here, she said evenly. No one recorded that line. By the stairs. A study partner smiled with his mouth. Not his eyes. And slid his backpack closer. Outside. Flags cracked like a starting gun. My manager, palms on the table. Spoke policy, back of house through the weekend until this clears. He handed me copies of my time cards. Keep these. They tell a story. The student government account posted a glossy pledge about integrity and speaking up even when it's close to home. That night, under the dining hall heat lamp, Chloe didn't flinch. Everyone will believe me. I'm student government. Dean's list. You hover. Also, when I fail, I'll look principled instead of unlucky. I said only. I printed something for my email. Her eyes flickered. Later, the dean's office called meeting Friday. 8 a.m. Bring Dokumentation. I practiced the one motion that mattered paper across table. Full stop at the period and slept beside the folder like it might stop the room from tilting. At 4:41 a.m. Decisions are clean. I printed 8 months of timesheets in 0559. Out 1514. And circled the mornings that contradicted any chance of stealing an 8 a.m. Exam. Bank statements. Next deposits only. No Bursar activity. One ugly, $1. 150 paydown, with my memo family card temporary. 2 rejection letters on crest heavy letterhead, fresh copies without red circles, and a sticky that read status, not enrolled twice. I pulled an email from a lit professor. You're adding something valuable to the conversation. Not a grade. But presence. A department message. Large lectures will not verify IDs at the door. A TA's Welcome All Learners review note with the course code. Marco, my coworker, wrote 4 plain sentences, sunrise, clock-ins, reading on breaks. No access to tests. I dressed like I was selling the idea of ordinary and put the glittery wristband in the folder sleeve as a private receipt. The administrative building at 738 looked like a museum of seriousness. In the room, long table. Framed diplomas. A cup of pens like a quiver. We're here regarding an allegation. The chair began. I kept his sentences with periods. I appreciate the concern. I'm not actually enrolled. I slid the rejection letter. Eyes dropped. The air moved. Timesheets. Bank statements. Emails. Marco's note. I attended open lectures. I said. I didn't sit exams. The only stapled packet in my bag was that letter. The associate dean tilted her head. So the claim targeted a non-student publicly. During finals? In a library. Policies don't care about charisma. We'll confer? They said. I breathed once. Large. Then watched a conduct officer guide Chloe down another hallway. I didn't want spectacle. I wanted the rules to do what they say on the tin. When the committee returned, charge inapplicable. A note will clarify your non-student status. We're referring the public allegation to student conduct. The word inapplicable rang like a quiet bell. I gathered my papers the same weight. A different use. They asked me to wait outside while they handled the related matter, which is committee for bringing the weather indoors. Through a cracked door, I caught edges of Chloe's arc denial. He forged those, the bookstore verified. Logistics. He used my access, no evidence. Anger. You're ruining my finals week. Then bargaining. Call it a misunderstanding between family. The associate dean's pen clicked when she said, You announced it in a library. During finals, a staffer closed the door, the hallway went back to carpet and hum. By noon, student government announced an emergency ethics session. By 1, the campus account posted a correction thread about verifying facts before public claims. Marco found me behind calculator pallets. They asked if you really read on breaks. He said. I told them you're boring. It landed kinder than any defense. A lit professor passed me on the quad and gave the smallest nod that still means I see you. That evening, silhouettes gathered behind frosted glass for Chloe's session. I didn't go in. When she finally stepped out, her blazer looked heavier. You didn't have to make it public? She said. I didn't. I said. You did. We stood through a full cycle of motion sensor lights. We're family. She tried. Family helps family. Family doesn't frame family. I answered. And the sentence wasn't a performance just measuring a room, so I wouldn't bruise the same shin twice. The email the next morning sounded like weather outcome and next steps. Charge inapplicable, notation added. Separate conduct review opened. Student government followed with special session summary harm acknowledged. Verification, emphasized. Temporary suspension from leadership, pending review. I closed my laptop and went to work. My manager assigned me inventory promotion by tone. Apologies arrived in modern shapes. A DM with, I'm sorry for assuming. A folded note from the calculus girl. Thank you for helping me before any of this. I'm sorry I forgot that first. I filed it behind Marco's statement and decided not to build a museum of wrongs. Mom called with the tarp word ugly and the old script. You're sensitive. Your sister has a lot on her plate. I didn't audition for martyr. Boundary. I said. No more emergencies. No more alibis. Silence. Then a softer. We love you both. Good? I said. Then you'll love this. I'm enrolling where the numbers work. A community college advisor drew me a clean path capture credits I've already learned from the back row. Transfer agreement locked in ink. Tuition that won't auction off my sleep. You already have the muscles. She said. We'll build the right skeleton. The bookstore moved me to back of house lead with a laminated access card that felt like an inside joke from the universe. In July, an envelope arrived that didn't apologize. Admission for fall. Orientation on the 28th. I laid it next to the rejection letters and watched new paper. Teach old paper better grammar. Chloe texted. I'm sorry. I'll be better. I'm starting over. 2. I replied. Start with small. True things. On the first day, I wore a lanyard with my name spelled right and said one sentence in class. Period placed where it belonged. Sometimes I pass the library railing and my stomach remembers the drop. It doesn't make me smaller now, it makes me specific. I stock shelves with steadier rhythm. Our tutor without taking the head seat. And keep a thinner folder labeled, now. When people ask how I handled it, I say, belief isn't proof. Proof travels. And if they're still listening, boundaries keep proof from running a marathon every time someone throws a sentence from a balcony. It isn't cinematic. It's ordinary things finally allowed to stay true. A person doing the work, a room doing its job, and a family learning that love without accountability is just PR. The flags still crack. The scanner still chirps. The vending machines still restock on schedule. The difference is, the sound doesn't feel like a countdown anymore. It's a metronome. I know the beat. I'm playing on purpose. Get ready for our second story. A powerful, raw confession from someone who spent years trapped under a mother's cruelty. She called him a curse, denied him freedom, and demanded devotion when everyone else abandoned her. But this time, the abuse ends. Stay tuned and hear how he finally breaks the cycle. Story 2. My mother always punished me and told me I was born only to ruin her life. She denied me outings, friends, and living my life. Now that her golden children don't even look at her, she demands that I take care of her like it's nothing. But her abuse will end today. I grew up hearing the same phrase like a broken alarm clock. You were only born to ruin my life. She didn't say it in a single outburst or in the tantrum of a tired mother. She said it calmly, with that coldness that cuts into your skin, like someone dictating a destiny. We lived in a small apartment above a laundromat in an ordinary neighborhood in the United States. With thin walls, the constant smell of cheap detergent wafting up the stairs, the whirring of the machines mixed with my mother's screams echoing around the kitchen. From the outside, the neighbors saw her as a self-sacrificing woman who worked too hard and did what she could. Inside, I knew her hobby was keeping me under her thumb. She drove me to school with that Mother of the Year smile. But as she closed the car door, she told me not to do anything stupid, because as soon as she heard a rumor, she'd take my breath away. I was the living reminder of a life she felt was screwed up. And she wasn't going to let me forget my role in her tragedy. My brothers were her trophy, her golden children, the kings of the damn prom. She let them go to parties, drive the family car, invite friends over to watch the game, and even order pizza during the week. I had to stay and wash dishes and listen to her laugh with them in the living room while I scrubbed the grease that always seemed to return as if the stove hated my existence. When I asked if I could go to the movies with my classmates, she responded with the same old song that she didn't have money for, your spoiled little boy whims. That if I wanted entertainment, I should clean the bathroom. And when I tried to explain that it wasn't a whim, that I just wanted to live a little, my mother would turn around with that knife-like look and say, I was lucky to have a roof over my head. That if I didn't like it, there was the door. Some nights I heard her bragging on the phone that she had my rebel under her belt. She laughed, and that laughter made my blood boil. The house had absurd rules that only applied to me. I couldn't lock my bedroom door because there are no secrets in this house. I couldn't use the phone after dinner, because decent people go to bed early. I couldn't stay up practicing with the school team because I'm not going to be a lazy chauffeur. When I asked permission to go to the fall dance, he gave me the finest taunt that I didn't know how to dance. That who the hell was going to ask me? That I shouldn't make a fool of myself. I remember standing in the kitchen with the invitation folded in my pocket and my hands damp with soap, listening to my brothers argue about what they were going to wear that same night. One of them asked me if I was going, and the woman stepped forward to laugh and say, in the sweetest voice, that he doesn't do well in that environment. Then, when we were alone together, he finished with his usual venom. You stay. You're not here to show off your misery. I wanted to break something. I wanted to scream. But I learned to grit my teeth until I felt the metallic taste, to breathe deeply as if swallowing my rage so no one would see it come out. At school, the counselors noticed I was always on edge. With sunken eyes and the posture of someone who sleeps poorly and eats worse, a teacher once asked me if everything was okay at home. And I, with that stupid loyalty they beat into us, replied yes. That my mom was just strict. Strict sound dissent. Strict sounds like something that builds you up. Mine was something else. My thing was having to ask permission to breathe. If I forgot a dish in the sink, I'd wake up with the lights on and her standing in front of my bed, delivering that long-winded sermon where every insult was disguised as advice. She'd tell me that if I didn't exist, she could have studied something else, traveled, had a real life. I listened to that with a heavy heart. And a part of me, the most broken part, began to believe it. Because that's how these bastards work. They repeat and repeat until you've embedded their voice in your skull and can't distinguish theirs from yours anymore. Every small achievement of mine was a reason to deflate. When they offered me a part-time job at a sandwich shop, he told me they must have given it to me out of pity, with my poor little face. Who would have refused? When I tried to get my driver's license, he hid my papers and gave me the stupidest excuse in the world that he'd kept them in a safe place and to stop making things up. Because no one sabotages you here. You sabotage yourself. So I had to walk, endure the cold and heat to get there and back. Arriva sweaty. Arrive, frozen. Always have time to cook. To fold clothes. To clean up the dog urine that, coincidentally, only I saw and only I cleaned up. My brothers could leave glasses all over the house, and my mother acted as if an invisible person had picked them up. If I left a friend behind, I'd get the lecture of the century. Once, when I said I was tired, he responded almost tenderly that it was good practice for adult life. And inside, I thought that if adult life was anything like this, I'd rather stick my head in an oven. I didn't say so. Of course, because saying so would be my own death. There was no shortage of religious theater. On Sundays, the lady would dress in soft colors, put a hand on my shoulder as if she loved me, and tell everyone that this is the little one who grew up sensitive. I swallowed my thoughts and spat out smiles. Sometimes women would come up to me and tell me I had a mother of gold, and I would nod with a politeness that cost me blood. Inside, I saw her in the kitchen at home, saying I was a burden, that I had a lazy face that provoked slaps, that if I weren't her son, she wouldn't even hire me to sweep the sidewalk. All of that stays with you. It changes your spine, makes you walk hunched over, afraid of taking up space. Over the years, it got good at disappearing. I spoke softly, walked on the sidewalks. I didn't ask for anything, and yet, even when I remained silent, there was always something wrong. That's the twisted grace of abuse. The goal moves forward every day, so you never reach it. When I finally reached that age, that sounds like freedom. The age at which you can legally leave without permission. I left. It wasn't an epic scene. There were no slammed doors or final speeches. I stuffed my few belongings into a backpack that smelled of chlorine. I put on a sweatshirt that still smells like survival to me today and walked to the bus station. I left a note on the table that said something like, "Thanks for nothing." And I swear my hands were shaking. Not from fear of the street, but from the childish fear that she would appear behind me and drag me back. On the bus, I sat in the back, leaned my forehead against the window, and realized that the tremor in my stomach wasn't just panic. It was also a cloudy joy. The kind of joy that hurts because you don't know how to use it. I arrived in another city, rented a small shared room with cockroaches and noise, and for the first time, I breathed without asking permission. It wasn't a pretty life, but it was mine, and that was already a victory. Over time, I began to build what she never wanted me to have: my own routine. Friends who didn't need to sign a notebook to enter my life. Nights of cold pizza after a long shift. Laughter that didn't ask for forgiveness. I worked at whatever I could find. Scraped together some money. Learned to say no. That I'm not covering a shift today. That I won't stay quiet if you talk to me rudely. And when her number appeared on my phone, I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. Sometimes, my curiosity got the better of me, and I heard a voicemail. It was always variations on the same old rosary that she was tired, that no one understood her, that after everything I'd done for you, how could I possibly abandon her? At one point, she blurted out that line she liked to use when she wanted to be a martyr, that if I left her alone, I'd regret it. I turned off the phone and poured myself a glass of water as if it were whiskey. I drank it slowly and promised myself I wouldn't fall for his bait again. What I didn't expect was the most cynical twist: that his golden children, those princes of his theater, would begin to disappear. Everyone also went their separate ways, far from his control. And the throne remained empty. That's when the lady changed the script. She went from, "You ruined my life," to the family. It's the most important thing. With a speed that's laughable. If it didn't make you want to break a wall, she sought me out more, writing entire paragraphs where she portrayed herself as an elderly woman without support. She reminded me that I'm your mother, with that insistence on blood they use when they have no other choice. She sent me pictures of prescriptions, as if paper had the power to erase old blows. Fresh insults. Lost years. And I, who had already learned not to swallow glass. He looked her in the eye even when I was just staring at a screen. And I knew she wouldn't lift a finger. Not out of pure malice, but out of simple justice. It wasn't my job to heal the wounds she'd inflicted on herself with laughter. It wasn't my duty to pay the bill for her poison. The day she came looking for me at work was the final proof that my instinct was well calibrated. She showed up in her Sunday best with that soap opera victim face, and made a scene in the middle of the hallway as if I owed her my life. She said, "So everyone could hear that this ungrateful man is going to let me die." I breathed, told her as much as I could, and told her in a low voice, so only she could hear me, that I wasn't going to act as her nurse, that I wasn't going to stop living to mend a past that wasn't a misunderstanding. It was her choice. She wanted to offend her. She wanted to cry. She wanted to drag me back to that dance where she leads and I obey. But not anymore. I shook off my fear, spoke to my boss, told what needed to be told, and made it clear that this won't happen again. That night, I walked home feeling less burdened than before. I wasn't happy, but I was at peace with a decision that was finally mine. Now I'm here with my back straight and my pulse steady, ready to tell the story as it should be, without embellishments to soften it or exaggerations to make it look like a movie. This happened in a country where people believe family is a refuge, but it isn't always the case. Where neighbors can see the facade and have no idea of the hell brewing inside. It took me years to learn to call what I experienced by its name. And it took me even longer to accept that the most damningly effective revenge doesn't have to involve fire or shouting. Sometimes it's a no that sticks, a boundary that isn't negotiable, a silence that is no longer fear, but dignity. And yet, I won't lie to you. There's also a part of me that wants him to hurt, to feel every inch of the loneliness he sowed, to reap his harvest without me acting as a scarecrow. Today my version of justice begins, and it doesn't come with blows or threats. It comes with memory. It comes with paperwork in order. It comes with locked doors, and a "so far" said without trembling. Because yes, her abuse ends today. Not because she's changed, but because I'm no longer playing her game of Update 1. Several months have passed since I left the house, and I thought that by putting physical distance between us, all that poison would stop reaching me. But I was wrong. The silence of not hearing her screams every day was a relief. Yes. But somehow she was still there, stuck in my head, as if she were living rent-free in my thoughts. I tried to concentrate on my work and paying the rent for that small room with damp walls. But every now and then the phone rang, and I saw her number on the screen. At first, I didn't answer. Then curiosity won out, and I listened to the messages. They were always the same. A parade of complaints, cries, and repeated phrases ad nauseum that she was alone, that I was cruel, that she had given everything for me, and now I was turning her back on her. The most annoying thing was the manipulation disguised as pleading. Like when she said, "A mother always forgives, so I should forgive too." My blood boiled because I knew perfectly well there was no forgiveness to be found, because there had never been any real repentance, only the urge to have someone to burden her misery on. It was then that I understood something I had a hard time accepting. She wasn't looking for me because she loved me. She was looking for me because she no longer had anyone else to play doormat. The Golden Children had quickly learned what it took me years to discover, that with her, you never won. Each of them built their own lives and walked away. They were no longer there to take her to medical appointments, nor to accompany her shopping, nor to lend her money. They left her alone. And now it was my turn. The discarded one. the one who was never enough, but now served as a last resort. The thought made me laugh bitterly. During my adolescence, she denied me everything. She treated me as if I were a mistake in her perfect script as a self-sacrificing mother. And now that the protagonists have left the stage, I was expected to step in as an extra. And the best thing is that he spoke as if nothing had ever happened. In one of his tearful messages, he said that children should be there to take care of their mother, regardless of their differences. Differences. That word sounds too mild to cover up the years of insults, humiliation, and senseless punishments. It wasn't differences. It was pure, unadulterated abuse. The worst part of it all is that part of me still wondered if I was doing the right thing. I was raised with this toxic idea that family is sacred, that blood can do anything. And even though I knew firsthand that this was a lie, the doubt would creep in at night when I was left staring at the ceiling. I remembered his voice repeating that I was going to regret it. And I wondered if he was right. But then I was just reminded of those nights he'd wake me up to yell at me because a plate had a grease stain on it. Or that time he banned me from going to the fall formal, telling me there was no point in me going because no one was going to invite me. Those memories were like anchors. They terrified me. But they also kept me strong. I didn't owe her anything. Not a visit. Not a call. Much less taking care of her. Meanwhile, life went on. My job wasn't great, but it allowed me to pay the rent and have the basics. I had started hanging out with colleagues after work, meeting people who didn't look at me with a magnifying glass of what they owed, but with simplicity. In those conversations, I realized I'd grown up twisted, that it wasn't normal to have to justify every breath I took. When I shared a bit of what I'd experienced, people looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and pity. And that served as a reminder that it wasn't just an exaggeration in my head. They had really, me, and there, in the midst of those conversations, I understood something important. My mother wasn't a woman who needed me for love. She was a woman who had run out of servants. And I wasn't going to get down on my knees again. That first half year away was like endurance training. Each message from her was a test I passed, ignoring the call. Every night I doubted myself. I remembered my brother's laughter as I washed dishes, punished, and that memory sustained me. There wasn't a major confrontation at this stage, just an accumulation of manipulation attempts on his part and a firm decision on my part not to answer, not to open the door, not to return. Even though it cost me bitter pills to swallow, and even though I woke up with nightmares, I was laying the groundwork for what was to come. What I never imagined was that her insistence would escalate, that the woman would stop texting, and one day decide to seek me out in person, dragging the past into my present with all the force of her venom. But back then, I didn't know it yet, and all I thought was, if I held on a little longer, all the noise would go away. How naive of me. Update 2. It had been almost a year since I left, and I no longer jumped every time my phone vibrated. But I still carried that old fear that makes you look over your shoulder, even if no one's behind you. Working at the sandwich shop had become routine, opening early, smelling of warm bread and stale coffee, surviving lunchtime with my hands running between bread rolls and trays, and closing with my back aching and my feet pleading for respite. One afternoon, when the place was packed and the line wrapped around the door, I heard a voice that made my stomach sink. I didn't have to turn around to know it was her. I felt her before I saw her. She walked in with that offended queen's stride, pushing the door as if it were her own, and blurted out my full name as if it were an order. I turned slowly, butter knife in hand, and saw her standing at the bar, dressed in Sunday makeup, with that martyr's look she always wore when she was about to put on a show. She said she'd had enough of making her suffer, that if I stood there staring at bread and ham while my mother died, karma would kick my butt. People stopped talking. My colleague tried to continue preparing orders as if nothing had happened. But the customers settled in to watch the free circus. I felt a sense of shame, the kind that burns your ears and makes you want to crawl into the freezer. I won't lie. My hands trembled. Not out of respect, not out of guilt, but because of that reflex that remains after years of being yelled at without warning. She continued, since she'd found an audience. She said that after everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me. That if anything happens to you, God help you, because I won't be here anymore. I breathed the way I'd taught myself to breathe as a teenager, counting internally, and told her in the quietest voice I could, so only she could hear me, that this wasn't the place or time I was working, that she had to leave. She smiled sideways, that dry smile that always heralded another attack, and said, "Your boss would be delighted to know you treat your mother like garbage." He pressed his lips together as if he'd won. My manager, a huge man with a face that always seemed to be thinking about the accounts, came out of the office upon hearing the noise, and stood there with that ladylike tone. "Not here." Very polite, very textbook. He explained that she couldn't interrupt, that if she wanted to talk to me, she could do so later, that there were clients waiting. She got offended, as if someone had spat on her. Her voice cracked. She said, "This is an emergency," and let me go, looking straight at me. She said, "If you don't come with me right now, I swear I'll never forgive you again." I felt my anger rise like a flash of heat, but I still didn't give her the pleasure of seeing me lose my temper. I told her to leave again. It was like throwing water on a stove. She got even more heated. The manager signaled me, "Go to the back, breathe, in the cellar," with the noise of the extractor fan and the smell of pickles. I heard her voice filtering in from the front, louder, more accusatory. She said, "This ungrateful brat is going to leave me to die alone. If you could see what he's doing to me, it breaks my heart." I heard her try to cry, that cry with its false echo, which I knew well, and something inside me grew tired in a different way, as if I'd been tripped over by a new wire. I came out, still wearing my apron, stood in front of her, and, without raising my voice, told her that I wasn't going to be her nurse, that I wasn't going to bear a guilt that wasn't mine, that emergencies are called to the number everyone knows. They're not resolved by coming to destroy my job. I said that if I kept making a fuss, they'd call security, and that I could talk to whoever I wanted, as long as they let me do my shift. She looked at me in horror, as if she didn't recognize the child she could break with a raised eyebrow, and for a second, I noticed a crack in her theatrics. Then she changed her mask and said, "You were raised to hate me. That this city rotted you." I thought, "No, you rotted me?" And I finally learned to clean myself up. My manager intervened and, with that textbook, patience, one acquires the hard way in the United States working with the public, offered her a number to file complaints. And she felt mistreated. That this wasn't the place. A client, a man in a suit wrinkled by the heat, told her to stop, that some people were coming to eat and return to the office. My mother told him not to interfere, that this was between mother and son. There, the manager raised his hand without shouting and warned that if she continued, they would call the police to remove her for disturbing the peace. I don't know if it was the word police or the look on the faces of the people who were no longer buying her act, but her body relaxed. Before leaving, she gave me the phrase she reserves for when she wants to plunge the last knife, that when I'm in a box. "You're going to beg for forgiveness on your knees." I looked at her, and for the first time felt like I was standing on my own 2 feet. I told her I wasn't going to her funeral to beg for forgiveness, or anywhere else. That she owed it to herself for all the time she chose Herida instead of caring. He turned around with feigned dignity and left, still muttering that I was a heartless man. The next few hours were a mixture of nausea and relief. I was shaking inside, like after running in the rain. And at the same time, I was breathing easier. The manager called me into the office, offered me water, and told me I wasn't in trouble, that he had a mother too, but that there were limits. He used simple words. No textbook psychology. Just the clarity I needed. "We're not going to allow you to be harassed here. If he comes back, he'll be banned. And if necessary, we'll call the police." And that's it. He asked me if I wanted to go home. I told him I'd rather stay, that if I left, I'd be drowning in old guilt. And I didn't want to. She made a report, wrote down what she saw, and asked me to save the messages I have from her in case they're ever needed. I left the office with the paper in my hand, and a strange feeling, as if there was finally an adult on my side. I wasn't alone. I wasn't the kid I'd been before, locked in a house where everything depended on his whims. There were rules here. There were people who didn't know me, and yet they weren't going to let them step on me. I clung to that like someone clutching the edge of a pool to keep from sinking. A couple of weeks later, when the dust of the scandal settled, I made a decision that changed my mind. I went to therapy. I didn't arrive reciting speeches or looking for phrases from the calendar. I went because I felt like my heart was pounding for no reason, and I was waking up with my teeth clenched. At the community clinic, a therapist with a calm voice and non-judgmental eyes listened without interruption. And when I finished, she told me something that hit me like a dream. You're not crazy. She's not being cruel. You're protecting yourself. She spoke to me about setting boundaries without embellishment, about how no contact isn't revenge. It's self-care. And even though I'd come up with the idea of wanting revenge, I realized that the most fucking effective thing I can do to make her hurt is exactly that: live without her. Refuse to enter her dance. I not give her one more scene. She suggested I write a letter I didn't have to send, just to get out what I could never say. I wrote it one night after work, longhand, with a pen that was running out of ink. I filled pages with everything I'd swallowed since I was a kid. I burned it in the sink of the small room with a cheap candle and felt ridiculous and free at the same time. It wasn't a magic wand. She kept calling, sending photos of recipes, throwing out lines from a novel to make me fall. Once, she sent me a photo of an old doll that had been mine as a child. As if that memory would soften me, I responded with silence. Another time, she called my older brother to accuse me, and he, as always, gave me his good son lectures. He told me we must be compassionate. It's our mother, and I'm tired of fighting with shadows. I told him he wasn't there when she had me wash the floor at midnight for a friend, that he didn't hear me when he told me I was a mistake with a full name and a first name. He replied that it's over now. Get over it. That get over it infuriated me, but not like it used to. Instead of hanging up furiously, I told him that everyone lives with their own decisions, that if he believed so much in compassion, he should move in with her. He hung up offended, as if I had an obligation to maintain his pretty position. I stared at the ceiling, breathing heavily, and realized that my fight with him was also part of the same web. They needed a good one so they wouldn't break down inside. I didn't have that comfort. I had to see her without makeup. To clear the air, I went to the store's human resources department, brought a copy of the report, and asked them to put my name on a no visitors list for personal reasons. I don't know if that damn procedure exists or if I just made it up along the way, but the manager told me we could leave a note, that if she came back, she'd be asked to leave, and if she insisted, the police would be called for disturbing the peace. All in simple terms. No legal quibbles. I left that office with something I never had back in the house where I grew up: support. I also blocked his number again, but I saved the old messages in a folder, in case they could be used as evidence someday. Not because I want to start a lawsuit, but because I know myself and I know that on bad nights, my head makes up stories. Sometimes I need to read his voice to remind myself that I'm not crazy or exaggerating. A month after the scandal, the scene that finally toughened my skin occurred. She returned, not to the store, but to wait for me outside, near the bus stop. She saw me leave with my apron in my backpack and approached with that smile that said, "Let's talk like adults." She said she didn't want to fight, that she just needed help with some appointments, that it would be temporary. I replied that I already knew that word in her mouth, that it had always been temporary for her until I broke. She said, "What did I do to you to make you hate me like that?" She said it in that drawl she uses to crush your heart. I told her straight, "You screamed at me until I broke. You made me believe I was a mistake. You took away my options. You hid my papers. You made me live in fear. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was your choice. She was offended. "Of course," she said. "Any strict mother does that. That without discipline, I'd be a criminal." I replied that discipline doesn't require humiliation. That what she calls strict, I call cruelty. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her any more than we'd already insulted each other our entire lives. I just stated my point. When she saw I wasn't budging, she threw out her final hook. That there's a house that could be yours if you help me. I laughed. And it wasn't pretty. I told her that house was nothing but debt, and that I wasn't going to mortgage my peace for 4 walls that already reek of resentment. She was speechless for a second, rooted to the spot. And then she spat at me. That you're just like your father, a bastard on the run. I shrugged and replied that if it were her choice to choose me, then I'd plead guilty. I boarded the bus with weak legs but a light chest, and as the city flashed by, outside the window, like an old film, I understood that this was my small revenge that day, not giving her the spectacle, not giving in, not paying with tears, what she wanted to exact in drama. I chose a revenge that was boring for someone who loves chaos, but efficient for someone who wants peace. And although my body still ached as if I'd been in a fist fight, for the first time in a long time, the night felt like rest. I knew it wasn't the end, that with her, there's never a before and after, that she always finds another angle, another card, another cry. But I also knew that every scene I refused to play is another brick in the wall separating me from her poison. And brick by brick, with calloused hands and words finally spoken, I was building a place where I was finally in charge. Update 3. A couple of years had passed since I left, and that scandal at work. I was convinced that after that public ridicule, she would stop for at least a while. But I was wrong. The truth is, with her, there was never a full stop, only ellipses disguised as calm. One afternoon, while returning from work, I ran into a neighbor from the old block where I grew up. It was one of those coincidences that seem like something out of a bad joke. I was walking with a bag of groceries, and he, an older man with whom I'd barely exchanged 2 words in my childhood, recognized me and stopped to ask how I was. We chatted a bit, the usual, until he tactlessly blurted out that he'd seen my mother being taken away in an ambulance a few days earlier. He said she'd fallen in the house and lay there for hours until someone noticed. He told me this with a sympathetic expression, as if he expected me to break down right then and there. All I did was nod and say I hoped she was okay and continue on my way. Inside, what I felt wasn't guilt or sadness. It was nothing. A flat emptiness, as if I'd been told about an accident involving someone I barely knew. And that lack of reaction, far from worrying me, gave me clarity. The woman had used up all the empathy I could have ever had for her. Shortly after, I learned she was in the hospital. The news didn't come from her, but from my older brother, who decided to call me in the tone of both judge and executioner. He told me I was a monster for not showing up. How could I possibly stand idly by while our mother was sick and alone? He launched that sermon of her blood as if it were a spell forcing me to obey. I let him talk. I listened to him vent, and when he finally stopped, I responded calmly because I didn't feel like yelling. How strange. You never said anything when she treated me like garbage. You never stood up to her when she forbade me from going out, when she hid my papers, when she yelled at me until I believed I was a mistake. You never said anything then, but now you're here demanding that I play the role model. So if you want to be a hero, go ahead. It's your turn. Good luck with that. He was silent for a few seconds, breathing heavily, and then abruptly hung up on me. I guess he expected me to break down or be swept into his idea of a close-knit family, but all he managed to do was reassure me that I was making the right decision. During those months, while she continued to recover in the hospital, I carried on with my life as if nothing had happened. I went to work, went out with the few friends I'd managed to make in this new phase, and tried to rebuild what had been broken in me over the years. There were nights when my head played tricks on me, because it's not so easy to shake off the conditioning of an entire childhood. I remembered his voice screaming at me that I was going to regret it, that I was going to be alone. And for a second, that seed of doubt sprouted, But as soon as I stopped to think about reality, about the concrete facts, the poison lost its power. I didn't owe him anything. That fall in his house wasn't my fault. It wasn't my responsibility. And I wasn't going to sacrifice even an inch of my peace for a person who denied me even the most basic things. In the following weeks, I received messages from my siblings, each with their own way of pressuring me. One said it was time to show maturity, as if growing up meant giving up again. Another accused me of being cold and selfish. And I thought, how ironic, because coldness was the only thing I'd ever received from my mother for as long as I can remember. Growing up for me meant learning not to repeat the same old routine, not to let it squeeze me dry. It would have been selfish to have returned to their side and continue carrying that cross while they carried on with their lives in peace. What I was doing was finally taking care of myself. And even if they didn't understand, that didn't change the fact that the decision was mine and no one else's. News of their fall spread among acquaintances. Some tried to approach me with comments disguised as concern. Others outright judged me. A neighbor from those days wrote me a message saying that resentment never leads to anything good and that parents always do what they think is best. That phrase inflamed me. I didn't respond because I knew I'd waste time explaining to someone who'd never been in my living room what it meant to live by their rules. There's no way someone who only saw the facade could understand the hell within the walls. I put my phone away, closed my eyes, and promised myself I wouldn't waste any energy trying to convince others. They saw the golden mother who put on her best face in church on Sundays, not the woman who yelled at me that I was wrong every time I turned off the church lights. As time passed, she left the hospital and returned home. Weaker, on crutches, but still sharp-tongued. She didn't speak to me directly because she knew I wouldn't answer. But I learned from a cousin who continued to relentlessly tell me that I was cruel, that I was going to be damned for leaving her alone. That was the final confirmation of what I already knew. Even after being on the brink, there was no regret, no reflection, just the same old manipulation. Not even the shock of finding herself alone on the floor for hours served as a mirror. Instead of acknowledging what she had sown, she preferred to continue blaming. And in that stubbornness, in that inability to see beyond herself, I found my ultimate liberation. Because there was no longer room for doubt or regret. I wasn't going to take care of her. I wasn't going to run to her side. I wasn't going to forget what she did to me. She chose her path, and now I was choosing mine. And while some may not understand, that was the first time in a long time that I felt truly at peace. Update 4. More years passed than I thought I'd be able to endure without looking back. First, a year that stretched like chewing gum. Then another that slipped away between double shifts and nights of cold pizza. And by the time I realized it, almost 3 years had passed since I quietly left that house. My life was simple, but it was finally mine. I changed rooms, leaving the damp little room for an old studio in a building where the boiler sounded like a train. But it had a large window that let in the morning light and a wooden floor that creaked with every step. At work, I was given a little more responsibility, not glamorous, but enough to keep me from counting coins at the end of the week. And the therapist had taught me to maintain my boundaries without turning every conversation into a war. I would wake up early, walk to the bus stop with a cup of coffee, and think that the humble routine was exactly what I needed to keep from going crazy. Every now and then, a memory of him would creep in, a phrase he'd burned into me. But I didn't let myself fall asleep anymore. I listened to it in my head, breathed, and let it pass like the sound of an ambulance in the distance. It was midway through that 3rd year that reality began to bite me from the side. I knew it would bite me, the youngest golden son, the one who had always been her prince and her pocket-sized executioner. He moved in with her to lend a hand. She didn't tell me this. He told me with the certainty of someone who believes the universe owes him favors. He called me one afternoon, grabbed me as I was leaving work, and, in the tone of a general giving orders, told me that this affects us all, that we had to get organized, that I should at least send him money every month. I burst out laughing out of sheer disbelief and replied that if he did it, it was his decision, that he shouldn't include me in his plan, that I wasn't on the volunteer list. I noticed the impatience in her breathing, the dry tapping of her tongue against the roof of her mouth. Before she spit out the argument, I already knew that she put the house in our name and that tomorrow it will be ours. That's when I laughed. Truly, bitterly, and wearily. I told her that house wasn't a treasure chest. It was a hole with walls of debt. That the only thing she would inherit if she stayed was fatigue, overdue bills, and a smell of defeat that wouldn't go away even with fresh paint. She replied that I was exaggerating, as always. That she isn't perfect, but she's our mother, and that we have to be human. I replied that I'm human too, that for the first time in my life, he was being human with me. What followed was a torrent of things I'd already seen as a child. But now, with a price tag, strange numbers started calling me, friendly voices that changed their tone when I said my name, warning me that there were late payments on my credit card, that there was a loan with embarrassing interest, and if I could contribute an amount, I asked them to tell me where they got my number. And the response was always the same old song, that the lady listed it as a contact. I told them to delete me from their list, that I wasn't responsible, and that they shouldn't call again. Those who understood didn't insist, but others continued with their dog-biting habit. I wrote down dates, saved recordings, did the homework no one sees, and although it sounds dull, that small act of defending my phone was like putting new reds on the door. They couldn't get in that way anymore. Every now and then, one of those collectors would make the veiled dig that family usually helps in times like this. And I, without losing my composure, would respond that my family wasn't a word. It was an experience, and that mine had taught me never to leave the keys to my house in the hands of someone who'd set it on fire. During that same period, through one of those twisted twists of fate, a social worker from the hospital who had seen her last time called me. She used a respectful, direct, and non-preachy tone and explained that my mother had designated me as her emergency contact and that if anything came up, I could contact her for decisions. I felt the old pang in my stomach. Yet I answered clearly. I told her no, that I wasn't going to be responsible, that they could talk to my younger brother, who was living with her. I didn't spill the beans about my childhood. I didn't use her as a confessional. I just gave the relevant information with that professionalism that is appreciated in a country that tears apart, but also sometimes sustains. The woman told me she understood I would update it, and that if I needed any guidance on how to protect my data or my boundaries, she could send me a brochure. He sent me an email with a clear sheet of paper that explained in simple language how to ask to be removed from the lists, how to name someone else, how to say no without having to justify your entire life. I read it more than once. Not because I didn't understand it, but because it helped me remember that I wasn't inventing the right to say enough. My brother, meanwhile, started sending messages in the voice I knew by heart, that of the man who thought he was a hero, until the dragon actually spits fire at him. He told me that you can't imagine what it's like to be here all day, that your room smells of medicine and urine, that the nights feel endless when he starts screaming in pain. He asked me to cover at least one weekend so he could get some fresh air. I told him no, that I could hire someone for a few hours, that there are people who offer that service, that it's paid and organized, that he should stop playing the martyr and start managing things. He threw the money card at me, that it costs too much, that it's not enough. I told him to adjust then, that he should sell the giant television he bought, that it's not my fault he got on a train I didn't take. He got furious and called me insensitive. I blurted it out without embellishment. What sensitivity I lacked when I had to wash floors in the middle of the night while he slept like a king. Now he shouldn't ask me for the compassion he didn't give when I was the target. He hung up as if I'd slapped him. The lady, for her part, didn't stop playing. He stopped calling me directly because she knew I wouldn't be there anymore. But she sent me messages to aunts and neighbors, phrases wrapped in gift paper, traps with bows. An aunt told me that your mother is thinking of leaving you something if you prove you're a good son. She used those words with such ease that I laughed so hard I couldn't cry. I replied that wills don't erase insults or return stolen years, and that if she wanted to leave me something, it was debts. Because that house was mortgaged up to its very core, and the bills were paid late when they were due. My aunt tried the classic, "Don't talk about your mother like that," and I ended the conversation without raising my voice, with the courtesy I'd learned to use as armor, telling her the conversation wasn't doing me any good and that I'd rather not continue. Once upon a time, I would have remained trapped in that exchange, trying to justify myself. Now I said what I had to say and went to wash the dishes. There was a moment that confirmed to me that I wasn't crazy and that my reading of the drama was accurate. My brother invited me to a cafe to talk numbers, as if he were running a company. He arrived late, haggard, his hands shaking from lack of sleep. She started counting expenses, mentioning the special food, the diapers, the taxis to appointments, the medication the plan doesn't cover, the chair, the bathroom vanity, and the light that went out because she had the heat on too long. She said, in the voice of someone who sees a train coming, that home is security. That home is our future. I opened the messy folder of papers I'd brought along purely on instinct and took out a copy of a bank statement that had arrived in my mailbox by mistake one day when I still lived nearby. I laid it on the table and pointed out the late payments, the surcharges, the ridiculous charges for a loan that sounded like a scam. I didn't yell at him. I didn't humiliate him. I just underlined it with my finger. He read silently, swallowed, and then, with that mixture of wounded pride and reality kicking in, he said something would be done. I pressed my lips together to keep from laughing bitterly. He asked me to sign as a guarantor for the refinancing. He said it with the same lightness with which he'd previously asked me to hand him the TV remote. I told him not in my dreams. He got angry and called me a coward. I told her it was a coward to stay silent when she was destroying me as a teenager. That now you have to eat from your own menu. I stood up and let the coffee cool on the table. Amid the tangle of obligations that weren't mine, I did something that felt like silent justice. I called the office of the lady's primary care physician. I asked to speak to the person who updates the records. And with the calmness of someone finally driving their own car, I asked them to delete my contact number and add my brother's so that any notifications would go to him. I didn't give speeches. I didn't tell stories. I just gave some information. They confirmed the change. I closed my phone and sat on the edge of the bed. Watching the afternoon light climb the wall, I felt cruel for a second. Then I felt right. I'm not obligated to live tied to the one who drowned me. That's not cruelty. That's survival. One night, later that same year, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and saw my younger brother, his face drawn, a smell of exhaustion seeping from his pores. He came in uninvited, plopped down on the chair, and openly told me he couldn't do it anymore. He said every day there isn't a drama, that every favor is a bigger favor, that if I say no, he cries until he's dizzy. He asked me to take turns, to sleep there at least one night a week, so he wouldn't lose his mind. I remained silent for a moment. I truly looked at him, not with the old anger, but with that distance that the boss gives you to understand. I told him no, but not with contempt, rather with a clarity that leaves no gaps. I explained that it took me years to escape that circle, that if I entered again, I'd be lost, that he chose to move in there for the promise of a home that doesn't even exist beyond the paper. He got angry. He told me that if the same thing happened to you, I would still be there. I replied that that phrase wasn't valid because you were never there when it happened to me. He stood up, banging the table and slamming the door behind him. I was left with the buzzing in the walls and the certainty that, even though it pained me to see him dragged along, it wasn't my job to save him from his choice. With winter upon us, the woman's condition worsened. It started with flu that turned into bronchitis, with pains that required painkillers to relieve it. And then came the desperate move. An aunt called to say that your mother wants to see you, wants to apologize. She told me this as if it were the climax of a movie. I went to a local coffee shop where we agreed to meet, not because I believed in miracles, but because I wanted to see myself holding the line, Aunt arrived with her cheap coat and her messenger eyes. She told me that your mother wants to let you have the house if you take care of her for a while. There was no forgiveness. No acknowledgement. Only negotiation. I shrugged and replied that I'm not for sale. That there's no deal. That if I really wanted to apologize, I'd start by acknowledging what I'd done. No ifs. Ands. No buts. Aunt asked me not to be harsh. I told her the hard part was growing up with a voice telling me every day that it was a mistake. And now I'm the soft part with my own life. We each paid our dues, and I left without looking back. Near the end of the year, I received an envelope with a note on which my mother had handwritten that she forgave me for abandoning her, that she hoped we could heal in the future, and that the house will always be yours if you act like a good son. I read that note, folded it in half, and put it away without responding. It didn't deserve a speech. It was the same old choreography. She forgives herself for my choices and demands that I pay for admission to the final performance. I wasn't going to pay. I called the therapist, told her about the episode, and she reminded me of something I already knew, but needed to hear. I don't have to respond to every invitation to pain. Sometimes the cleanest revenge is to close the door and let the echo tire itself out. By then, my days had a new consistency. I started dating someone I met at the store. Someone who didn't try to fix or save me, just listened when I wanted to talk, and left me alone when I wanted silence. We kept each other company in our everyday lives, which is where my wounds heal. Cooking something simple, watching a bad movie, going for a walk in old jackets. That little life put my resentment in its place. It's not a burning bonfire. It's a hearth light that reminds me why I do what I do. I realized my revenge wasn't going to be a burst. It was going to be a trickle that never stops. Say no today. Say no tomorrow. Say no every time they try to put the yoke on me again. And yet, in case anyone thinks it was all linear, there were nights when I doubted. Not the limit, but the cost. I listened to the rain hitting the window. I thought of my younger brother with the garbage bags, of her coughing, and the old guilt loomed like a thief. Then I'd turn on the lamp, open the notebook where I'd handwritten what she'd told me hundreds of times. I'd reread that list of, "You're no good. You're a problem. If you weren't mine, I'd leave you on the street." And the doubt would clear like smoke. It's not resentment. It's memory. And memory well used saves your life. The last move of that year was an attempt at a legal tangle that didn't reach Puerto Rico. My brother texted me saying he needed my signature on some simple paperwork because the bank requires it. I asked him to send me a photo. It was a document promising to be responsible if things went wrong. I responded with a resounding no, and 2 more lines. Don't put my name on anything related to her again. Don't try to find shortcuts using my back again. He stopped talking to me for weeks. And in that silence, I found a peace I'd never known before. I don't know if it was the first time someone in my family understood that the old script no longer worked for me, but it felt that way. When I think about that time, I don't remember it as a storm. I remember it as construction, brick by brick, procedure by procedure, answer by answer. There were no big scenes. There was consistency, which is what someone who thrives on drama hates most. My mother likes the scream, the tear, the slammed door. I'm starting to like the certified letter, the blocked letter, the updated contact list, the appointment I don't make, the message I don't reply to. It's revenge without fireworks. But how it burns. Because it forces her to see her reflection in the only surface. She can't manipulate the void left behind by someone who no longer plays. And yes, in that void, I can sometimes hear my own echo, but that echo now belongs to me. Final update. 5 years have passed since I walked through that door and swore to myself I wouldn't be his servant again. 5 years of silence, of blocked messages, of ignored messages, and of arguments with my siblings that were now more repetitive than a broken record. Life went on. I changed jobs a couple of times. I learned to manage my money better. I moved to a place that finally felt like my own and built relationships with people who didn't know me for the drama, but for who I was at that moment. There were nights I still dreamed of his voice yelling at me, of the kitchen lit up at midnight as he forced me to clean up for something trivial. But those nightmares faded when I woke up in a bed no one could invade, in a space where the rules were mine. It wasn't easy. It wasn't instantaneous. But little by little, my life stopped revolving around her. And that was the greatest victory. One day, almost unexpectedly, the news arrived that I imagined my entire childhood, but never knew how it would hit me. My older brother called me in that dry voice he uses when he doesn't know how to start a conversation, and bluntly told me that our mother had died that morning. He told me this, expecting a long silence. Tears. I collapse. All I did was lean my forehead against the wall and listen to him hold his breath on the other end of the line. I asked him what had happened, and he told me that she'd been more fragile for weeks, that an infection had taken her in a matter of days, that the doctors had done what they could. There was no epic speech, no final reconciliation, no pardon. She died as she lived, surrounded by problems she never wanted to solve, waiting for someone else to take charge. I hung up the phone and stood in the middle of the room, with the morning light streaming in through the window, feeling a strange emptiness. It wasn't sadness, nor joy. It was more like an inner silence, as if a radio that had been playing in the background for years had suddenly been turned off. The family began preparing for the funeral. My younger brother wrote to me demanding that I attend, that I at least have the decency to show up for the final farewell. He said not doing so would be inhumane. I replied that I wasn't going to go, that I wasn't going to stand in front of a coffin to feign respect for someone who never respected me. He hurled insults at me, telling me I was heartless, that not even a dog abandons its owner. So I let him write whatever he wanted and didn't reply. That same night, I received a message from an aunt, one of those who always defended my mother's theater, asking me not to be resentful, that we all make mistakes. I calmly replied that I wasn't being resentful, that I was simply being consistent. I didn't owe her anything, nor did I owe her anything, and that would have been the most honest way to say goodbye. Not being there, while they arranged flowers, candles, and prayers. I did something very different. I left work, stopped by a liquor store, bought a cheap bottle of whiskey, and came home with my decision made. I poured myself a glass of ice, sat down on the couch, and put on some music that made me feel alive. I toasted alone, not with sadness, but with relief. It was like taking off a backpack that had been hung on me at birth and that I could never put down. That night, I didn't shed a single tear. And I understood that this was my greatest revenge, not even giving him the posthumous satisfaction of my tears. She had taken everything from me as a child. But she wasn't going to take my nights as an adult. My siblings, on the other hand, were devastated, though not so much because of her, but because they discovered what I had known for a long time. There was no inheritance, no house without debts, no hidden fortune waiting to be shared. All there was were unpaid bills, loans with absurd interest rates, and a pile of paperwork they now had to sort out. I received angry messages accusing me of leaving them alone with the mess, as if I had any obligation to bear the burden. I replied only once, and then blocked them. I told them they chose to stay, that they believed the story of the house, that they played the game of sacrifice, hoping for a reward. I didn't. I chose to leave in time, and although it cost me scars, here I was free. The curious thing is that after his death, there wasn't the immediate relief I expected, but rather a calm that took time to settle. Weeks passed, and I still woke up expecting a message. A call, all a complaint. It was as if my body didn't yet know that the threat no longer existed. But little by little, each morning that dawned silently was a reminder that the war was over, at least for her. And in that calm, I began to realize that my revenge had never been to see her suffer, or to expect her forgiveness, or to prove anything to her. My real revenge had been to survive to build a life where his shadow didn't rule. And now that he was gone, that revenge became a permanent victory. A few months later, I received an envelope with legal documents, officially informing me that the house was lost, that everything was being auctioned off to cover debts. I read it. I folded it and put it away in a drawer, with no emotional weight. It was like a symbolic closure. That place where they yelled at me, where they made me feel like a mistake, where I spent nights of humiliation, no longer existed. There was nothing physical left to tie me to that past. I closed the drawer, poured myself another drink, and stared out the window at the snow falling, thinking that finally, after so many years, that story was over. And that's how I knew the justice they expected wasn't a dramatic punishment or a moment of regret on her part. It was simpler and more powerful. The woman died alone, without the company of the children she adored so much, without applause or recognition, surrounded by debts that reflected what she had always been a void she could never fill. I, on the other hand, was alive, with a future, with the ability to laugh, to love, to sleep in peace. That was my revenge. To live when she bet her entire life that I couldn't.